Hello everybody and welcome to the License to Chill talk. My name is Ariel and I'm a director of product at Snyk. I lead the Snyk open source product and as part of that our license offering as well. I have two great partners for this talk today. First, Dominy, our general counsel, and Benji Weber, director of engineering and my engineering counterpart. As you probably guessed, we're going to talk about license compliance today. First, Stephanie will share why it's important for any organization to care about license compliance. She'll also explain what are the needs of a legal team from a license compliance tool. Next, Benji will share how did we start our own license program at Snyk, how did we roll it out, and also what are the needs from the engineering team. Finally, I will take you through how Snyk can help both legal and engineering teams achieve their needs. And with that, I'm happy to let Stephanie take you through the legal story.
Thanks, Ariel. Hello, I'm Stephanie Dominy. As Snyk's general counsel, I look after the legal and compliance functions at Snyk. One of my jobs is to think about risk and governance and all the things that could damage the company. The things that keep me up at night are the risks I don't understand or that I can't control because I'm not close to it. One of those things is open source licenses. If you're a lawyer or a risk manager in a technology or software company, you probably understand open source software in broad strokes, but most of us are not actually experts in it. Even less of us are software engineers by background. I've never written a line of code in my life, but I know that there are big risks around using open source software. Let's go through some of them, which are risks for almost any company and are certainly risks for Snyk. The legal risk. This is the hard risk, the lawsuits. Now, some open source licenses are permissive, which means you can use them and there are no restrictions or very light restrictions. For example, MIT and Apache version 2. Others, such as the GNU GPL license, require that when you use GPL licensed software to make other software and release it to the public, the resulting software must be open source with the same license. This is known as a copyleft or reciprocal license. So to clarify, if we combine code licensed under the GPL license with our own code, which we use to power the Snyk product, copyleft elements in GPL require us to release the entire source code for that combination. This has happened in a number of cases to Hancom, Cisco, and BT, to name a few, who were forced to release to the public their proprietary source code in a number of products because they incorporated GPL in their code. This is a real risk for the Snyk business model and any other company who derives revenue from their software. Open source code developers will often seek damages as a remedy for a breach of license terms. Panasonic was sued by CodeKinetic for $100 million for using software in in-flight entertainment systems, which was eventually settled out of court. We're also starting to see GPL trolling, along the same lines as patent trolling. This involves developers of GPL license code extorting money from companies by threatening to enforce the GPL license against those companies unless they pay the original developer. Let's turn to the commercial risk. We see our customers being much more vigilant about open source code. They know that if they license software from us and that software contains incorrectly licensed open source, it can infect their own product or service and jeopardize their business. So they seek assurances from Snyk. They want to know that our products and services do not violate open source license terms. They will choose vendors based on their assessment of how effectively those vendors can demonstrate compliance with license terms. They need the evidence and we need to present them with reporting. Without this, we could lose the deal. Now I turn to the diligence risk. If you're raising financing or preparing for an IPO, or if you're the target of an acquisition, open source compliance is a diligence issue. Can you show that you have a system of reporting and tracking your use of open source? Can you show them an inventory of open source used in the business? Can you demonstrate a compliance program with documented policies and processes for managing licenses? If yes, this will boost confidence in your company. If the answer is no, this is a factor that can affect your company's valuation. I wanted to work with the Snyk product and engineering team to really understand how we could minimize our open source license risks. Our aim is to free people at Snyk to use open source libraries without the need for prior approval, where it's safe to do so, and to give them guidance on the pitfalls to avoid. We started with a bottom-up approach. As I said, myself and the leadership understand the risks, but we need our engineers and product team to build a process around how code is actually developed. We need the ability to monitor and track our use of open source with good reporting. We have a tool for that, the Snyk License Policy Manager. But this was an opportunity to actually improve the functionality of that tool by incorporating some of our specific governance needs. The tool had to be flexible enough to accommodate different use cases for licenses and therefore different risk sensitivities. We also wanted to make sure we could communicate all these risks and processes to our developers in a simple and effective way. Tooling is not the end of the story. We also had to communicate, educate, and embed the process into the developer workflow. So having developed a Snyk process to address our governance concerns, we wanted to share a little of our experience with you. I'd like to pass you over to Benji Weber, who can tell us a little bit more about how we built out our internal process.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hello, everybody. My name is Benji. I'm an engineering director here at Snyk, supporting a group of engineering teams. I wanted to briefly tell you a bit about how and why we created a license compliance program and how we shaped it from my team's needs. Stephanie has highlighted some of the risks of building on top of open source. We needed to level up our approach to compliance. Our team was growing rapidly, and with it the risks. We needed a way to manage the risk as we grew without threatening what makes us successful. We had more people building more and more software on top of more and more open source, more software, more licenses, more people making more decisions, more risk of an incompatible or unsafe license slipping through. With a larger team, it becomes harder to communicate guidance of which licenses are applicable when. When licenses are not suitable, it's also important to make the why clear, so we don't breed resentment or a constant stream of questions for our legal team. Snyk can help with these, and Ariel will show you more presently. On the engineering side, we need to be able to ship things fast. We practice continuous delivery. We have changes going out to production continually. It's valuable to us to be able to ship fast, help customers fast, learn fast. I didn't want us to introduce roadblocks such as approval processes that might slow us down. Organizations that respond to risk by adding bureaucracy will slow down. We also need to be able to build on top of open source, build on the shoulders of the amazing open source software and libraries that already exist. We can achieve infinitely more that way. Further, we open source plenty of our own software, both to contribute back to the community and to help the communities work with us. So we wanted to retain maximum flexibility to use and contribute as much open source software as possible. But all of this needs to be done safely, not just to manage the legal risks that Stephanie highlighted, but because if it's unsafe, we'll instinctively do less of it, slower. This is the mindset for our compliance approach from the engineering side. Help a growing team act safely while shipping fast using open source. But it's not all about engineering. We formed a cross-functional squad to create a balanced policy that appropriately trades off different risks, from commercial to legal to productivity. So we had reps from the product team, engineering, and legal. And this cross-functional squad also helped adoption. When we came to roll out the compliance policy, that this was a group effort to serve everybody's needs. It wasn't seen as an edict from one part of the business. The approach we came up with boiled down to a simple policy, easy to understand, but allowed for some flexibility. Because flexibility, being able to use some licenses in some contexts but not others, is a trade-off with complexity. The more options, the more difficult to understand. So our license policy looks like a bit of a matrix. We have several categories of software that we build. For instance, software that's open source, where we distribute the code, through to internal and proprietary tooling. Mechanism for distribution is one dimension, and the other is the type of license. We bucketed licenses into categories to reduce complexity, and then categorized licenses in different distribution contexts by level of risks. And then we automated it and socialized it. We drink our own champagne, or dog food this automation, using our own product to enforce our own compliance policy, give our own engineers fast feedback if they're doing something risky, and help them understand why. Automation is key to scaling without slowing down with bureaucracy. It helps people make safe decisions, but autonomously. Lastly, we socialized it, documenting these policies and how various licenses fit it. We ran sessions to walk everyone who writes code at Snyk through it and answer questions. We involved teams in rolling it out, got them to try out the policies with their own tools, feedback the edge cases they find, and help refine the policy and our product as well. And now I'd like to hand over to Ariel, who will show you more on how we use Snyk to automate all of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Benji. Let's see how can Snyk help both legal and engineering teams to achieve their needs. We've heard about the legal needs from Stephanie and about the engineering needs from Benji. Some of them are mutual and some are unique to the persona, whether it's the legal persona or the engineering persona. Let's see how Snyk can help both. Let's see it in action. I'm going to start with policies management and reporting. This is our policy manager. This is where legal team can create policies and assign severities for the different licenses. Let's look in one of the policies. On the left side, you can see all the organizations that we have under that group, and you can also see which organizations are assigned with this policy. On the right side, you can see all the licenses that we support, and you can see the assigned severities. Another thing that you can see here is a place for the legal team to leave notes to the developers. This can help developers down the line as they code, because they will see these notes in case they're going to use one of those problematic licenses. We've mentioned how important it is to have flexibility and better granularity when setting a policy. Sometimes it's not enough to assign a policy to an organization, because one organization can contain multiple application types. For example, an internal app, but also a distributed app. Both of them will have different needs from the policy. We can achieve that by assigning project attributes. Let's look at the internal apps policy. As you can see on the left side, I've assigned it to a specific attribute, to the internal attribute, and not to an organization. Now we expect every project that will be assigned with the internal attribute to pick up this policy and not any other policy. You see on the right side, again, the licenses that we support, but I'm not assigning severity for any one of them, just for the sake of this demo. Let's move to the reports. This is our reporting section and the summary tab. Here you can see high-level information about on the group. On the left side, you can see security issues. On the right side, you can see license issues. You can see both of them by severity. This is the Issues tab. It contains all the issues that you have in the group. It contains both security and licenses. If you want to focus only on licenses, you can move the vulnerability, filter the vulnerabilities out, and here you can see only the licenses issues that you have. This is the Dependencies tab. The Dependencies tab contains all the dependencies that are being used in the group. For every dependency, you have the dependency name, the version, the license, and the copyrights. You can also export it to a CSV, and it can help you in case you need to create reports for the software you create and ship to your customers. This is the Licenses tab, and it includes all the licenses that are being used inside the group. For every license, you can see the dependencies that has this license, and also which projects are using those dependencies. Let's move to integrate with existing processes and ship fast and shift left. Starting with integrate with existing process. We want to be where developers are in the day-to-day. We want to make sure we integrate with the tools they already use, so they won't need to embrace new processes. We want to make sure that we have many integrations across the SDLC, starting with our coding time, with our IDE plugins and the CLI, next to the Git integrations we have, and next to the CI/CDs with many plugins that we have. And if you don't see the CI/CD you're using here, you can always use the Snyk CLI as part of your pipeline. Let's move to ship fast and shift left. Let's talk about shift left. It will be much easier to solve an issue, whether if it's a security issue or a license issue, during coding time. You really don't want to handle those issues too late during the build time, or even worse, during the deployment or after the release. Let's see how we can achieve that and how can developers get early feedback and interact with the policies. Let's start with our CLI. This is a sample app that I've created. Let's run Snyk test and see what happens. As you can see, I've tested 65 dependencies and we didn't find any issue. Now let's install a new dependency. Now let's run Snyk test again. As you can see, now we've tested 151 dependencies and we actually found 3 issues. The first one is a security issue, and the bottom 2, those are licenses issues. You can note that we found a GPL 3.0 license here, and you can see here the note that the legal team left for me in the default policy. This note can actually save me time, because if this is an internal app, I can go ahead and continue my coding work and not reaching out to the legal team. Let's look at the IDE. This is the IntelliJ IDE. We have our plugin for this IDE and many others as well. So you can see at the moment I have 0 issues, but this is correct to a minute ago before I added the new package. Let's run another test. And as you can see, we now have the same 3 issues that we saw in the CLI, including the GPL 3.0 license. Let's move back to the CLI. Another command that we have is the Snyk monitor. It runs the same test as the Snyk test, but it also published the results to the Snyk UI. Let's see how it looks. As you can see here, we have the same 3 issues that we found earlier, and you can also see again the note from the legal team here in the UI as well. These are all the projects and the repositories that I've imported into Snyk. The CLI app is the one that we just used during the demo, and I have 3 more imported from GitHub. Let's focus for now on the distributed app and the internal app. Let's take a closer look into them. you can see that the distributed app has 0 issues. And we're looking at dependencies, it's using EJS and Express. Now let's look at the internal app. Internal app, again, 0 issues, 65 dependencies with EJS and Express. So both applications are 99% identical. The 1% that is not, if you note here, I've assigned the internal attribute to the internal app. This means that whenever this project will interact with the policy, I expect it to pick up the internal app's policy and not the default policy. Let's look just at the distributed app and you can see that there is no value assigned here. Let's see how it impacts PRs that developers create. I've created two exactly the same PRs, one for each application. This is a distributed app. Scrolling down, you can see the 2 checks by Snyk, one for licenses and one for security. Those checks will run every time, for every new PR that is being created for a monitored repository. This way, you can make sure that you continuously monitor your repositories and make sure no new issues are being introduced without you knowing about it. As you can see, the security check passed, but the licenses failed. Let's see why it failed. And you can see that it failed because it contains a GPL 3.0 license. Let's see what happened for the internal app. For the internal app, both checks passed. And why did they pass? They passed because this is using the internal policy and not the default policy. And if you remember, the internal policy didn't have a severity for any of the licenses. That's it for today. Thank you, Benji and Stephanie, for presenting with me, and thank you all folks for joining us. We'll be more than happy to answer your needs inside the chat.